For now, it's 7 o'clock, so let's start. So we were testing the sound a while ago. Now let's start officially. Good evening, everyone. Happy Lunar New Year. I'm Wenxing from National Human Rights Museum. I'm also the moderator for today's forum. This evening, we have our second session for this year of 2021. The topic is, so what happens after new immigrants started to lead the singing of the national anthem at Taiwan's National Day celebrations? The speaker is Ms. Long Weixuan, Southern Office Director from TIFA, Taiwan International Family Association. Thank you for coming today. Before starting, let me explain some things to our new friends. Last year, we started our forum series, and so far we have invited different NGOs, museum practitioners, scholars, and experts as our speakers for our online forums. For example, we had Serve the People Association from Taoyuan, and we had Brilliant Time Southeast Asian Bookstore curator, which talked about migrants' narrations from females' perspective. We had the Garden of Hope Foundation Migrant Service Center to talk about domestic workers' situation. We had Tiwa speaker to talk about foreign fishermen in prisoners' situation. So for every session, we have different speakers who, from different perspectives, like legal, human rights, and the real situation, to share their frontline practice and advocacy experience. They allow us to see that different museums and NGOs use different methods and perspectives to allow people to understand this issue better. Before starting today, let me talk about our procedure today. Our forum is held once every month, and each time for 1 hour. I'm the moderator with opening remarks, and then our speaker will have a 40 minutes presentation. At the end, we will have 5 to 10 minutes Q&A session for you to raise your questions. So you can use the chat box at the up right to ask questions. You can see that icon on your screen. After the speaker's presentation, I will sort through the questions and we will answer your questions together. We have simultaneous interpretation throughout the session. If you want to listen to English, you can press the Your Language Floor button to choose the channel you want to listen to. Now let's enter the topic today. According to the statistics from the Ministry of the Interior, there are more than 650,000 new immigrants in Taiwan with Taiwan citizenship, which surpasses the number of Taiwan's indigenous people. They mainly come from Southeast Asian countries in mainland China, including Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, and Cambodia. Our topic today is about marriage immigrants with Taiwan's citizenship. They are mostly women, and in early days in Taiwan called them foreign brides. This term is highly derogatory and discriminatory. In the past, sometimes, especially when they came from Southeast Asia, when they were trying to get the citizenship, they faced very unfair treatment and unequal treatment. Thankfully, over the past few years, because of many NGOs, women's associations, and new immigrants themselves standing out, after many years of efforts and legislation and advocacy, things have largely improved. For example, in 2019, in our National Day celebration, new immigrants led the singing of our national anthem, and currently there are already new immigrant public servants. For example, legislator Lin Lichan, who is Cambodian Chinese, and legislator Luo Meiling, who is Malaysian Chinese, and also our presidential office national policy advisor Hu Qingxian, who is Vietnamese in Taiwan. But does it mean that we have really broken cultural barriers and ideologies and class differences? Does it mean that we are treating these new immigrants equally in terms of law, society, and cultural inclusion? Or is it the case that we still have a lot of room for improvement? Well, we are very honored today to have Ms. Long Wei-Xuan, Southern Office Director of Taiwan International Family Association. You have read her bio. She mentioned that because of her work related to new immigrant service and advocacy, she has reconstructed her understanding of Asian history and geography. Let me quote her now. She wrote, "I see that national borders are often artificial. They are actually boundaries drawn by human beings. This reminds me of Benedict Anderson's classic work, Imagined Communities' Reflections on the Origin and Spread of Nationalism, which talks about how national borders are formed and constructed, which involves politics and culture." So now let me give the floor to Wei-Xuan. Wei-Xuan, please. Good evening, everyone. I'm Wei-Xuan, Long Wei-Xuan, Southern Office Director of Taiwan International Family Association. Actually, today, my sharing is from the perspective of our work experience in our association. I'd like to talk with you about when marriage immigrants come to Taiwan. Well, in 2016, we saw that new immigrants and new immigrants' children performed dancing in the inauguration ceremony. And in 2019, we also saw that new immigrants led the singing of our national anthem in the celebration. It seems that their status was raised very high. For example, a lot of news coverage says that our celebrations are very inclusive and diverse. But in my work experience of 14 years, how do I look at these phenomena? Well, now I'm going to share my perspective and my experience on this topic. First of all, let me introduce our association to you. We were founded in November 2006. We are an NGO, and our members are mostly new immigrant and Taiwan local workers like me. And most of the members are women. We named the association this way because, well, not just women, but also, for example, husbands and some other family members of these new immigrants, they also face some stigma and misunderstanding in our society. So we hope that Taiwan society can better understand these cross-national families. And we also want these family members to be more independent and mutually help each other. And our work includes these. For example, we enter communities to organize language courses, growth courses, and also we organize trips and family reunions. We want to become these new immigrants' second home in Taiwan. And also, in addition, for Taiwan society, we also want to do something. For these new immigrants, they have to adapt to their lives here, and it's also important that the society has more comprehensive understanding, non-discriminatory understanding about them. So we also enter campuses to talk about new immigrant cultures. And in our work, we also face issues such as marriages, residence status. And for such cases, we also provide individual help. Such help, the core of such help is to improve, to change Taiwan's overall understanding about new immigrant human rights. So we also participate in such advocacy. And today, whether or not someone is naturalized, he or she lives in Taiwan. So when there's an amendment to our basic labor law, many immigrants suffer. And also during the pandemic, many new immigrants also suffer. So we also pay attention to other social issues in addition to immigrant human rights. So today, let me start with this topic. In 2019, in the National Day celebration, new immigrants led the singing of the national anthem. There were in total 32 new immigrants. 30 of them came from Southeast Asian countries. They were all women. You see their traditional clothing. And the other two were a Japanese pianist, Azusa Fujita, and also Father Edmund Ryden. Media coverage at the time focused on these two new immigrants. They were naturalized because of special contributions to Taiwan. What that means is that these two people didn't need to give up their home country's citizenship in order to get Taiwan citizenship. So, what I want to say is that, well, in December 2016, there was this amendment. Before that, if a foreigner wanted to naturalize and obtain Taiwan's nationality, he or she would have to give up their original nationality, whether they came from the US, Southeast Asia, or Germany. At the time, in order to get Taiwan or Republic of China's nationality, they had to give up their original nationality. But after December 2016, after the amendment, people with special contributions to Taiwan didn't need to give up their original nationality anymore. In other words, this is the first time that Taiwan had such an arrangement, and the first time that Taiwan allowed dual citizenships for people who wanted to naturalize themselves. In the past, they always had to give up their original nationality, which means that they would only have Taiwan's nationality. But after December 2016's amendment, there were two types of immigrants. In one group, people still need to give up their original nationality, and the second group of people had dual citizenships. Before today's presentation, I used special contribution and naturalization as keywords to search on Google, and I saw these pictures on Google. I don't know if you can see some similarities or commonalities among these pictures. Of course, you see that county mayors and city mayors and government officials took pictures with these people, with these foreigners. And another commonality is that most of these immigrants are religious workers. And another similarity is that they have all lived in Taiwan for a long time, so they are relatively senior. Indeed, if we look at these cases, these fathers, sisters, or religious workers, we can see that indeed they have contributed a lot to Taiwan society. I'm sure that Taiwanese people in general may not have contributed as much as they have. But why were they naturalized so late? Well, as I said, in order to naturalize in the past, they had to give up their original nationality. So it was a very difficult situation that foreigners had to face in the past. And in the past, for such requirement of single nationality delayed these foreigners' obtention of Taiwan's citizenship. Indeed, they contributed a lot to Taiwan, so many people felt that such relaxation of the law was reasonable. It made a lot of sense. But what I want to talk about here is what is exactly special contribution? Well, these some other new immigrants, they work here, they contribute their labor in Taiwan. Why can they not have dual citizenships? Does it mean that their contributions are lower? I want to focus on marriage immigrants today, and also I want to mention blue-collar workers in Taiwan today, migrant workers. They contribute the best part of their youth and their life to Taiwan. Sometimes they work in Taiwan for 14 to 16 years, but they cannot naturalize because of the current law. So, in Taiwan, in such cases, they cannot get Taiwan citizenship.
Now I would like to talk about why I chose this angle of this Nationality Act, because it is a regulation that stipulates rules about how a foreigner can acquire our citizenship, which means that this set of provisions are aiming to do one thing, which means that stipulate the definition of the so-called other, the foreigner. To what kind of criteria should they meet so that these other can become one of us? So now I would like to take this perspective of the amendment of this Nationality Act, what has been changed and what was not changed. And with that, we can actually see how the criteria change over time. So we can see the revision stipulated a shorter period of naturalization. So for a foreigner to become our national citizen, you need to first have a full residency over 5 years for you to apply for naturalization. And in 2016, that 5-year period was revised to 3 years. And you can actually see to the bottom left of this slide. And on the poster, it says that it's actually a press conference to advocate for the right of the single-parent new immigrant. That was a press conference we held for these new immigrants. When they became single parents, relatively speaking, for them to apply for naturalization, they are hugely disadvantaged. And that threshold for them can be quite high. Therefore, we held that press conference to advocate for their right to lower that threshold. So we have worked all the way from 2006 to 2009, and it was until 2016 that this regulation was amended. And also for that naturalization process, we demanded that no statement of finance should be required, which means for a foreigner living in Taiwan, they are asking for this proof of financial stability so that they will not become independent. So this is the government's logic. Therefore, in 2007, on 9th of September, a lot of these advocacy groups, including TIFA, we actually had a march on the street. We think we should abolish that rule of providing financial statement. In the past, you have to have that 20 times of this basic income. When you reach that level, can you apply for naturalization? You can see that from year 2007 to 2016, this rule was abolished. It was a really long way to go. And in the past, the Nationality Act stipulated that in order to apply for naturalization, you need to give up your citizenship of your mother country. But while you give up your mother country citizenship, then the household registration office would not necessarily grant you the citizenship to Taiwan. So we had actually a lot of citizens, a lot of people lost their citizenship because of the system. So they changed the rule. They can get their naturalization first, and then they can give up their mother country citizenship. So this stateless situations won't occur again. So we had to do a lot of social advocacy by marching on the street in order to change all these rules. And it was because of our new immigrant sisters. They actually had a lot of these bad experiences of discrimination in Taiwan. They tried really hard to make the government understand. Of course, it is a very challenging process. What I'm trying to say is that the Nationality Act itself is not actually a hard brick entirely. So it should actually change over time according to humanistic needs. So we have this one interesting change. Article 3 of Nationality Act mentioned that in order to be naturalized as a Taiwanese citizen, which means that you have to, when you want to change from other to one of us, you cannot have any records of breaking the law, and you have to be decent. So in 2016, they changed the decency requirement, and that has been changed to this term of no illegal records. So I really want to ask you, no illicit or illegal behavior records. So I just want to ask you, being decent, and what does exactly that mean? No illicit or illegal behavior. What would be the legal definition of that? If, for example, if I break the traffic rules, would that be considered illegal behavior? If I have lewd behavior, would that be considered of undecent? Or if I ride my bicycle and I honk all the way, would that be considered as indecency? So we don't have specific legal definition for that. And this term gives our regulator, which is the Household Registration Office, a really big room for interpretation, which means the criteria itself is only a set of implementation rules, and the regulator, of course, would have the liberty to change accordingly. Of course, they would have, they said, as they claim, they will have meetings for negotiations. But it itself, because it's only implementation rules, that they can quickly change these rules. It's not like a legal process. We need to go through a lot of meetings for negotiation before the change. So that definition of illicit or illegal behavior is really elusive. So in 2017, they have added several articles. First, you need to fulfill your duty of support to your spouse and your minor children, and you cannot have a habit of domestic violence, and we also need to have the court judgment. It seems it makes sense that the court can deliver the judgment of the facts. So it seems that this is all based on the rule of law. However, there is another part of the provision says that, or there are sufficient facts. So who would be the one to confirm these facts? So according to this Ministry of Interior, they said that we will have experts and scholars at the meeting, but who would be the one to judge what is fact and what is not? And also the person in question, how would they interpret these facts? So that 2017 new rules, they emphasize the importance of this person in question's responsibility to support his or her own family. And a lot of these new immigrants who apply for naturalization, they are marriage migrants and they are female and they came to Taiwan because of marriage. But that does not mean that they should be all tied up to their duty to their family. So, about the revision of Nationality Act. So we want to change to this thing, which is Article 10 of Nationality Act, which says that when I acquire this nationality of Taiwan, so in general public's perception, that means that I have citizenship. But it is actually quite interesting that in Taiwan, even if these naturalized foreign nationals have their citizenship, they only got half of the citizens' rights, which means they have right to vote, but they don't have the right to be elected. It would be until 10 years later of the naturalization can they run for office. So in 2016, you can see to the right of the slide, that was actually another slide we made for the national referendum. So we had 10 proposals for that year's national referendum. So we have like a package of simple information written in Vietnamese and Thai and English. So we had full versions of translation of that referendum as a way to remind our naturalized citizens that what should they prepare and what exactly were stated in the referendum proposals and how should they vote for support or not support. So this is a way for us to help those naturalized immigrants to allow them a better opportunity or facilitate their process of or willingness to involve in the political process of the Taiwan. So we also went to the Central Election Committee to protest because we think this is supposed to be government's duty to do all these instead of being the responsibility of an NGO. So we think that there should be some guide to vote, to cast a vote, and even there should be different language versions of the proposed policies of those candidates. There should be multiple language versions for that. So this is actually also these naturalized citizens are only granted half of the citizens' rights. We think for a naturalized foreigner receive their naturalization, at the moment when they receive their citizenship, they should actually receive the right to run for the office and to vote. So when we said this on our Facebook page, one of the commentator leave a comment who said that this is actually a rule that makes sense because it was I have to live in Taiwan for over 20 years for me to be able to cast my vote. 22 years. That is the legal voting age. So you are able to run for the office once you become 22 years old. So for our naturalized foreigners, when they come to Taiwan, when they are naturalized, the majority of them are already adults. But since they're already adults, it doesn't make sense that for them to wait for another 10 years. So as I said before, that these Catholic fathers and nuns, they are already over 60 years old. Does that mean they have to wait for another 2 years or another 10 years for them to have this complete citizens' rights to participate in politics? Of course, people would challenged me that, of course, these nuns and fathers would not want to run for the office. Whether they want to run for the office or whether they have the right to run for the office, I think these are two different things. Like most of our participants of this forum online today, we probably are mostly over 22 years old. So we have right to run for office already. But we have the right, but whether we want to exercise the right, that's another issue. So these are basic protections for our citizenship. So that 10 years remain the same. Why is it 10 years? Why? Well, I have this. Why can they receive the full set of citizenship rights the moment when they receive their citizenship? So they ask us, why do we want to propose this? Because according to the Constitutional Court, this does not violate this principle of equality.
To come onto our border for an interview, if the marriage is questioned, then this person has to fly back to mainland China. But in recent years, the number of such cases has gone down. You may think that things have improved, but it turns out that it's not really the case, because on-border interviews are just part of the check. Some government officials will go to your home for another round of checks. So there are 2 rounds of checks for the truthfulness of the marriage. So when Taiwan government defines the truthfulness of a marriage, it's the job of the immigration agency and also the job of the Ministry of our Foreign Affairs. So I think this is a violation to the human rights of these marriage immigrants. For example, since the start of the pandemic, because of border controls, cross-border movement has become even more difficult. I personally know new immigrant sisters who in the past worked in Taiwan as migrant workers, and she met her current husband. Were she American, it would be much easier for her to come to Taiwan and join her husband, but she actually comes from Vietnam. So she had to return to Vietnam, and her Taiwanese husband also had to fly to Vietnam. They had to marry there. They had to get married there in Vietnam, and then they had to go to a Taiwan office, representative office in Vietnam for an interview there. And actually, the interview could not be immediate. They had to wait for a few months before the interview could be conducted. Usually, only 3 months after the marriage can they have an interview. And then our representative office then would decide on the truthfulness of the documents, the marriage, etc. And then the Taiwanese husband returned to Taiwan and brought the documents to our government agencies for marriage registration, and then he applied for a visa for his wife. So since the start of the pandemic, this Vietnamese lady that I mentioned originally had her interview in June. She was very anxious. So on Facebook, she told me that in March last year, interviews were all suspended, and she was wondering how she would be impacted. In February 2020, she got married with her husband, and she entered Taiwan only in December 2020. She waited for such a long time because of the pandemic and because of our overseas interview regulation. Without this regulation, which means that if we allowed migrant workers not have to wait for such a long time, she could have come to Taiwan much earlier. And actually, she suffered from the risk of get infected at the time. This is a violation and a harm to the reunion rights of such families. And also, don't forget that Vietnam also shut down their borders. So the husband actually, they use documents for interviews. So it means that basically it's the government's say. The government has the ultimate say, the ultimate right to define the truthfulness of a marriage. Finally, what I want to talk about is that such overseas interviews also impact LGBTQ marriages. When the legislation was passed, people were very happy, but after that, it turned out that some people's partners are foreigners, but in some countries, same-sex marriage was not legalized, and that became a problem. This has to do with a Taiwan's act governing the choice of law in civil matters involving foreign elements. So its Article 46 deals with marriage-related issues. For example, if a same-sex partner comes from a country where same-sex marriage is not legalized, then they couldn't get married. But recently, the Judicial Yuan wanted to amend the law. But what I want to say here is that even after the amendment, there would still be problems because for those 22 countries that I mentioned, because of overseas interviews, it will still be impossible for them to get married, even if the law is amended. So this is something that really violates and harms the reunion rights of such families. Now this ends my presentation. I just talked about my past work experience. To us, I think that for cross-national families, a lot of times, it's not just about personal adaptation and inclusion. What's more important is that our laws and institutions, when they deal with the so-called other, what is the right approach? I very much like our perspective, which is that in cross-national movement, which has become mainstream worldwide, some immigrants come first, others come later. But we believe that in terms of basic rights, there shouldn't be bias or there shouldn't be prioritization. It shouldn't be the case that if you come earlier, you enjoy more rights, and if you come later, you face more questioning and more challenges. And sometimes, for immigrants who come from Japan, the US, or Europe, and compared...
As I said before, foreigners applying for naturalization, their treatment vary greatly from country to country. When it comes to how our society perceives the immigrants, this will continue to be an issue. And I'm constantly thinking about the line being drawn. So as I said before, I have terrible knowledge of geography. So Now, whenever I have the chance to visit other countries, I'm fascinated by border lines. For example, like these borders between Malaysia or Indonesia. And when you come to this border, you will find that these borders are actually man-made results. People just build the walls around border lines. This is what my job has taught me, that these borders are man-made. They are artificial and they cannot be dissolved right away, but I still think there are possibilities to shake that a little bit, shake things up. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Wei Shen, for that insightful talk. So I'm still actually deeply thinking about the question she raised. Do we have any question from our participants? If you have any questions, feel free to leave your comments or questions in our chat box. You can use this opportunity to visit the fan page of TIFA. You will see that they have a lot of cultural activities. And I have heard I've heard this from her when in our previous talk that they have organized some interesting activities with performance elements, storytelling elements to show people the treatment and status of marriage migrants in Taiwan. So to raise awareness, so maybe Wei Shen, later on, if you have the opportunity, maybe you can talk a little bit about the work you have done in this area. And if you go to TIFA's fan page, you will see a lot of posts about food. Especially if you see that right now, you will feel you're quite hungry. It seems that there are a lot of posts about foreign food. So I would also like to ask Wei Shen, why is it that you choose food as a angle to reach out to the general public of Taiwan? What exactly is the message you would like to send to the general public for the general public to know more about these new immigrants? And also, I'm quite interested in one of the comments you made that because of the same-sex marriage which is legalized now, do you have some cases involved in same-sex marriage? I'm just quite curious. If you have any other question, feel free to raise your question in the general chat box and I can help you to ask the question. Now I'm going to give the floor back to Wei Shen. Thank you, Wenxing. Indeed, as I said before, that in addition to marching on the streets, we spend a lot of time and efforts reaching out to the general public to share with the public the stories of these new immigrants and their culture as well. So what have we done in the past? For example, we have taught them on filmmaking, editing, and we had community theater programs, which is a method to introduce to the general public about these marriage migrants and how they are treated and what their experiences in Taiwanese society. So we had this book published. So this is commercial time. So the Taiwanese grandma's recipe and the new immigrant sisters recipe. So we have collected recipes from our Taiwanese grandmoms, the older generation female, and our new immigrant sisters. So in the past, we had a Dragon Boat Festival activity for the Taiwanese grandmas to teach the public how to wrap traditional Taiwanese wrap dumplings, and for the Vietnamese sisters to teach general public how to make Vietnamese food. So this is actually a very good starting point to really share that experience. Food can be a really good take and good perspective because it's relatively low cost. For example, that you can have this fantastic tasty food and you can stay in Taiwan and have had that fantastic exotic food tasted, and you don't have to travel miles and miles to experience that. So I think that will be a really good starting point. And about this book, even though we have invited Taiwanese mother-in-laws or some of our volunteers and also our social workers, they actually write an essay, each of them, an article about one dish that lasts that has a lasting effect on their life. So there are memories from different generations and different countries, but you can actually see a very similar a course of historical development across Asia. For example, for Taiwanese grandmas in 1970s, they that was an age of industrialization, and a lot of Taiwanese grandmas, after they graduated from junior high school, they started working in factories because Taiwan was a world factory back then. And it is the same for the current Southeast Asian countries. For example, Vietnam now has resumed that role of world's factory because of the changing trend of the world. We can actually see very similar patterns across these countries, Asian countries. And you can actually see that even for this inland marriage migrants between different communities, different ethnic groups, uh, some of our Taiwanese grandmas, they were married to mainlanders who came to Taiwan after 1949, and there are cultural clashes. For example, one of the grandmas said that while her husband only preferred these buns. So in a way, I think dietary culture can actually revoke a shared feeling among each other, and this is how we can start to see each other. And one of our sister came from mainland China, and she said that when she write about the story, she talked about her experience of working in a big city, and after she graduated from junior high school, and it was about a migrating experience, and she really misses her hometown. And I think after the reformation and opening up, you can see that China uh, is now connected to the world. So I think food can be a good angle. And in terms of same-sex marriage, because the majority of the cases we address right now are those marriage migrants who are who got married through a heterosexual marriages. I have heard some cases, especially like those citizens from Vietnam, um, included in the 22 countries. And even though I have heard rumor words about amendment to that act governing the choice of law in civil matters involving foreign elements, but that is only granting rights to Hong Kong and Macau citizens. So that overseas interview it seems like a good system. For example, that will be a good way for people to think that it's a good way to stop the foreign elements. But I think to impose impact on the country through marriages can be quite a slow way. So we really need to see these people as individuals and see their lives. If you think overseas interviews is a good way to safeguard our society, I think we can definitely talk about it. Who is the one drawing that line? Because of course we are on the island, and that border is very clear and very specific. The border itself exists as something that can be challenged because we have also offshore islands like Lanyu, like Penghu, right? We are still the same country. So I think this is my answer. Thank you, Wei Shen. I really agree with what she talked about, that border, that lines. How exactly are they drawn up? In this society, we have been drawing lines, like Wei Shen said, who exactly is us and what constitutes Taiwanese, because Taiwan has always been a migrant society throughout our history. There are always different migrants coming to this land throughout history. I know for members of FIHRM-AP, I don't know, have you visited Taiwan before? And in terms of food culture, you will see that we reflect a wide, diversified cultural aspect. You will see food from all kinds of different countries. As we can all imagine, that diversity of culture can actually show the strength and the richness of lives. And can we really actually treat these late immigrants fairly? I think that is a really good reminder of our talk today. And thank you very much for your participation online. So we still have a little bit of time. So I would like to use this last few minutes to run some promo. So I have shared in the chat box of their Facebook page link of TIFA. And feel free, if you have any questions afterward, to write to us. And you can actually see they have lots and lots of activities. I do welcome you. If these activities happen to be in your neighborhood, please show up to give them some encouragement. And about next forum, which will take place on 25th of March. So that will be Thursday. So at the same time from 7 to 8 p.m. And we will have Ran Wensheng, father, and he is going to talk about how to crack how to fight the slavery system. So that will be the next topic, and we will have these more information released on our official website. And thank you very much for your participation. I'm really grateful to Wei Shen from TIFA for accepting our invitation. And she spent a lot of time preparing this talk, which is really insightful. So I think I still have a lot of questions hanging on my mind. I would like to learn more in the future. And lastly, thanks to I would like to express my gratitude to our two interpreters. So we have two interpreters who are Phoebe and Parker. And I would like to thank you for your support. Also, I would like to thank our participants. And this marks the end of our forum. Another reminder, I would like to see you next time on 25th of March. Goodbye.